Congratulations on 15 years, I whispered to myself, standing frozen in the doorway of my home office. The champagne in my hand felt suddenly heavy as I watched my husband Nate through the partially open door. He didn't notice me. He was too absorbed showing his executive assistant Amber the divorce papers spread across my mahogany desk. Once the anniversary cruise ends tomorrow, you can tell her everything, Amber purred, running her manicured fingers along his shoulder. The timing couldn't be more perfect. I should have known something was wrong when Nate insisted on a lavish anniversary celebration cruise around Puget Sound instead of the San Juan Islands getaway I'd suggested. "It'll be more memorable this way," he'd said with that practiced smile, the same one that had charmed Seattle's tech investors for over a decade, the same one that had once made my heart skip a beat when we met at that startup conference 15 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening had started beautifully. The yacht gleamed under string lights as it glided across the water, the Seattle skyline twinkling against the darkening sky. 50 of our closest friends and colleagues mingled on the deck, champagne flowing freely as the spring air carried snippets of conversation and laughter. I'd spent weeks planning every detail, from the personalized cocktail menu to the live jazz band playing our favorite songs. "Have you seen Nate?" I asked Rachel, my best friend since college, who was admiring the view of Mount Rainier in the Kia distance. She frowned slightly, her dark eyes scanning the crowd. "I think I saw him heading below deck with Amber. Probably some urgent client call they needed to handle." Amber Collins, his executive assistant of 11 months. Young, ambitious, with degrees from prestigious universities and a wardrobe that somehow always looked straight from a magazine spread despite what should have been an entry-level salary. I'd noticed how she looked at him during our holiday party, but I'd dismissed it as professional admiration. After all, Nate Mitchell was one of Seattle's most sought-after investment advisors. Everyone in financial circles looked at him that way. "On our anniversary?" Rachel's voice carried a note of concern that made my stomach tighten. I'd been ignoring the signs for months. The late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the way his phone was always face down now. But tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was supposed to be about us, about celebrating the life and success we'd built together. "I'll go find them," I said, forcing a smile. "Make sure everyone's glasses stay full." I walked through the yacht, my heels clicking against the polished wood floors. Each step felt heavier than the last as I descended the staircase, past framed photos of our travels, Tokyo, Cape Town, Barcelona, places where we'd once been happy. Places where I thought we still were happy. The hallway to the office was dimly lit, but light spilled from beneath the door at the end. The private office I'd arranged in case Nate needed to handle any client emergencies during our celebration. I heard their voices before I saw them, hushed but clear in the relative quiet. "Everything's prepared." Amber's voice was confident, professional, even in this moment of betrayal. "I've checked all the paperwork twice. Once you serve her the papers after the cruise, there's nothing she can do." "You're sure about the timing?" Nate's voice was the one he used when strategizing a major investment. Calculating, precise. "After the party is perfect," Amber replied. "She'll be emotional, vulnerable, more likely to sign quickly without scrutinizing everything. We've worked too hard to let her discover the offshore accounts or the property transfers." I stood there, my hand pressed against the wall for support, my world tilting on its axis. The celebration sounds from above faded to a distant hum as blood rushed in my ears. Through the slight opening in the door, I could see them clearly. Amber was perched on the edge of my desk, her skirt riding high on her thighs while Nate leaned back in the leather chair I'd given him for his birthday. Divorce papers spread between them like battle plans. "You're brilliant, you know that," Nate said, reaching for her hand. I couldn't have planned this without you. Once everything's settled, we can finally start fresh, just you and me." "And the prenup?" Amber asked, her fingers intertwining with his. "You're sure it's not going to be a problem?" Nate laughed that rich, confident laugh that had once made me feel safe. "That old thing? It expired after 10 years. Olivia never updated it, and I made sure we never discussed it again. Trust me, she'll walk away with barely enough to rent a studio apartment. After all, I've been moving assets for years." The crystal champagne flute in my hand suddenly felt too heavy. I watched as Amber leaned down, her lips meeting Nate's in a familiar way that told me this wasn't their first kiss. They'd done this before, probably countless times, maybe even in our home while I was traveling for my consulting business. "We should head back," Amber said, pulling away. "People will start to notice we're both missing." "Let them," Nate replied, pulling her closer. "In 24 hours, none of it will matter." I backed away from the door, my legs trembling beneath me. 15 years of marriage, of building a life together, and he'd planned to end it all. On our anniversary cruise, in front of our friends and family, the humiliation would have been absolute, exactly as they'd planned. I made it to the small bathroom at the end of the hall, locking the door behind me before I allowed the first tears to fall. My hands shook as I placed the champagne glass on the marble counter, gripping the edge to steady myself. In the mirror, my reflection stared back, a woman I barely recognized in that moment, her carefully applied makeup now streaked down her cheeks. "Olivia?" Rachel's voice came through the door along with a gentle knock. "Are you in there?" I opened the door, pulling her inside quickly. One look at my face, and she knew. "What happened?" she whispered, taking the champagne flute from my shaking hand. "I need your help," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I need you to call your brother." Rachel's brother, Greg, was a divorce attorney who'd handled some of Seattle's highest-profile splits. If Nate thought he could hide money from me, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. "Whatever you need," Rachel said, already pulling out her phone. "But first, we need to get through tonight without letting them know what you've discovered." I nodded, straightening my shoulders. Nate had taught me something after all those years of watching him close deals. Sometimes the best defense is making your opponent think they're winning. "Help me fix my makeup," I said to Rachel. "We have an anniversary to celebrate." As I reapplied my lipstick, blotting away the evidence of tears, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes harder, her smile sharper. Nate and Amber thought they had orchestrated the perfect plan, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. I hadn't just been Nate's supportive wife all these years. I was Olivia Mitchell, founder and CEO of Mitchell Tech Solutions. I'd built my consulting firm from nothing while he was still a junior analyst. My company now employed over 70 people and served clients across 3 continents. I'd signed that prenup when my business was just starting, but what Nate seemed to have conveniently forgotten was the clause my father, a retired judge, had insisted upon, a clause that invalidated the entire agreement in case of infidelity. I walked back onto the deck, accepting anniversary wishes with practiced grace. Nate and Amber had returned, standing slightly apart, playing their roles perfectly. I watched as he raised his glass in my direction, that familiar smile in place. "To my beautiful wife," he announced to the gathered crowd. 15 incredible years with the woman who makes everything possible. "Happy anniversary, darling." I smiled back, raising my fresh glass of champagne. Let them think they had the upper hand. Let them believe their plan was flawless. Because while they were plotting my humiliation, they'd given me something invaluable: the element of surprise. The party continued around me, but everything had changed. Each congratulation felt hollow, each toast tainted. But beneath the pain and betrayal, something else was growing: determination. Nate thought he'd written the perfect ending to our marriage. He was about to learn that this was just the beginning, and I would write the final chapter. The yacht. Docked just after midnight, the last guests disembarking with warm hugs and promises to do it again next year. How many of them would be shocked when news of our divorce broke? How many already suspected something? I watched through the windows as Nate walked Amber to her car, their bodies maintaining a careful distance, a performance for any watching eyes. My fingers tightened around my evening bag as he leaned in, presumably to open her door, their faces close enough for a whispered exchange. "Don't do anything rash," Rachel said softly, gently placing her hand over mine. "We need you thinking clearly." She was right. The fury coursing through my veins wouldn't help me. I needed precision, calculation, the same skills I'd used building my company while Nate built his investment portfolio. "Greg's meeting us tomorrow at 9 a.m., Rachel continued. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He said to secure any financial documents you can find without raising suspicion. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, anything that might show where Nate's been hiding money. I nodded, my mind already cataloging the possible locations. His home office has a safe behind the abstract painting. He doesn't know I saw him input the code last Christmas. The memory stung. I'd been watching him that day, thinking he might be hiding an anniversary gift. How naive I'd been. Rachel squeezed my hand. "Remember, let him think he's in control. We need time to build our case." Nate returned, his tie loosened, that practiced smile still in place. "What a night," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. His cologne, once comforting, now made my stomach turn. "You must be exhausted, darling. Why don't you head up to bed? I have a few emails to send." Emails. Is that what he called coordinating with Amber now? I forced a smile. Years of negotiating tech contracts making it feel almost natural. Of course, don't work too late. We have brunch with the Hendersons tomorrow. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Once Rachel left, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, our shared space of 15 years that now felt like a stranger's room. How many nights had he lain beside me planning my downfall? How many mornings had he kissed me goodbye before meeting? Amber? I heard his office door close, followed by the muffled sound of his voice, probably calling Amber, unable to wait even an hour before speaking to her again. I changed into silk pajamas, an anniversary gift from Nate that I now wanted to burn, and pretended to settle into bed. 2 hours later, his footsteps moved down the hall, past our bedroom to the guest room. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. His excuse of working late, wearing thin months ago. The guest room had gradually accumulated his things, a spare toothbrush, pajamas, his favorite robe, another sign I'd chosen to ignore. Once I was certain he was asleep, I slipped out of bed. Our home creaked familiarly beneath my feet as I made my way to his office. The abstract painting swung aside. Silently, I'd oiled the hinges last week under the guise of spring cleaning, revealing the wall safe. The combination was our wedding date, the irony not lost on me as the safe clicked open. Inside, organized with his typical precision, lay folders of documents. My hands trembled slightly as I used my phone to photograph each page, careful to return them exactly as I'd found them. Bank statements showing large transfers to accounts I'd never heard of. Property deeds for a waterfront condo in Bellevue purchased 8 months ago. And there, at the bottom, a manila envelope containing a copy of the divorce papers he planned to serve me. I photographed everything, my business instincts kicking in about maintaining evidence chains. As I reached to replace the last folder, something caught my eye. A small velvet jewelry box tucked in the back corner. Inside lay a platinum bracelet. I'd never seen the price tag still attached. An early freedom gift for Amber, no doubt. The sound of a door opening somewhere in the house sent me into action. Everything back in place, safe closed, painting straightened. I was halfway to the door when Nate's voice froze me in place. "Trouble sleeping, darling?" He stood in the doorway wearing the monogrammed robe I'd given him last Christmas, his expression curious but with a flash of concern in his eyes. "Good, let him worry." "Just looking for some aspirin," I said, gesturing to my temple. "Too much champagne, I suppose." "In my office?" He raised an eyebrow. I forced a sheepish laugh. "Force of habit. I forgot you moved it to the guest bathroom." A pointed comment that made him shift uncomfortably. "Right. Well, try to get some rest. Big day tomorrow." Bigger than you know, I thought, as I slipped past him. In our bedroom, I finally allowed myself to breathe. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, weighted with evidence of his betrayal. I sent a quick text to Rachel. "Documents secured. See you and Greg at 9. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake, my mind racing through 15 years of memories, re-examining them for signs I'd missed. The late-night calls he'd step outside to take, the business trips that seemed to multiply after Amber joined his firm, the way he'd grown. Protective of his phone, angling it away when messages arrived. Around dawn, I heard him leave for his morning run. Another recent habit that coincided perfectly with Amber's early morning spin classes at the gym near our house. How many of their plans had been made during those innocent-seeming exercise routines? I dressed carefully, selecting a cream silk blouse and navy pencil skirt that projected confidence and control. In the kitchen, I went through the motions of my morning routine, brewing coffee I wouldn't drink, setting out his preferred breakfast dishes. The security camera I'd installed last week, another home improvement project, would show I'd maintained our normal schedule. Greg and Rachel were already waiting when I arrived at his downtown office, early enough to avoid the risk of being seen by any of Nate's colleagues or friends. Greg Thompson looked exactly as I remembered from Rachel's wedding. Tall, with prematurely silver hair, and the kind of calm confidence that made him Seattle's most sought-after divorce attorney. "Olivia!" He stood to shake my hand, his expression serious but kind. "I'm sorry about the circumstances, but you did the right thing coming to me immediately." For the next hour, I laid out everything, the overheard conversation, the hidden accounts, the property deeds, the carefully orchestrated plan to blindside me on our anniversary cruise. With each detail, Greg's expression grew more determined. "Classic signs of premeditated financial concealment," he said, reviewing the photos on my phone. "The timing of the transfers, the property purchases through shell companies. He's been planning this for at least a year." "What do we do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. Greg leaned forward, his voice measured. "First, we protect your assets. Second, we gather more evidence. And third," he smiled grimly, "we remind Nate exactly why you don't underestimate a woman who's built her own empire." "About the prenup," I began. "He mentioned to Amber that it expired after 10 years. Greg's smile widened. "Did he? Interesting. Can you get me a copy?" "It's in my safe deposit box. I can retrieve it today." "Perfect. And Olivia, one more thing. He'll text or call soon, wanting to maintain the appearance of normalcy. Play along. Let him think everything's fine until we're ready." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from Nate. "Dinner tonight at Canlis to continue our anniversary celebration?" I showed the message to Greg, who nodded approvingly. "Perfect. Keep him thinking everything's normal. Meanwhile, we're going to turn his perfect plan into his worst nightmare." Looking at Rachel and Greg, I felt something I hadn't experienced since overhearing Nate and Amber on the yacht: hope. Nate thought he'd orchestrated the perfect betrayal, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail about me. I wasn't just his wife of 15 years. I was the woman who'd built a tech consulting firm from nothing, who'd navigated the cutthroat world of Silicon Valley investments, who'd learned to read people as well as I read financial statements, and I was just getting started. That evening, I sat across from Nate at Canlis, the city's most exclusive restaurant, with its panoramic views of Lake Union. He'd ordered champagne, of course, the same brand we'd served on the yacht. I wondered if Amber had helped him select it, or if that small detail had been his own contribution to the charade. "To another 15 years," he toasted, his smile never reaching his eyes. I smiled back, clinking my glass against his. "To getting what we deserve," I replied. If he noticed the double meaning, he didn't show it. Instead, he launched into a story about a client meeting, maintaining the performance of the attentive husband. I played my part too, laughing at the right moments, asking appropriate questions. All the while, my mind was elsewhere, on the prenup. I'd retrieved that afternoon, on the meeting scheduled with my company's CFO tomorrow, on the private investigator Greg had already hired to document Nate and Amber's relationship. When his phone buzzed midway through dinner, I noticed how he angled it away, how his expression softened momentarily before he excused himself to take an important client call. Through the restaurant's windows, I watched him on the terrace, his back to me, shoulders relaxed in a way they never were when he spoke with actual clients. "Problem at work?" I asked innocently when he returned. "Nothing important," he replied, his lie smooth after months of practice. "Just a nervous investor. Where were we?" The dance continued through dessert and the drive home, both of us playing our assigned roles to perfection. But as I prepared for bed that night, I realized something had fundamentally changed, not just in our marriage, but in me. The hurt was still there, the betrayal still raw, but overshadowing it all was a strange sense of clarity. For years, I'd compartmentalized my life. The ambitious CEO at work, the supportive wife at home. I'd dimmed my light in social settings where Nate needed to shine, downplayed my successes when they overshadowed his. I'd built my company despite his subtle discouragements, grown it while he insisted it was just a side project. Now, watching him prepare for bed in the room we'd shared for 15 years, the room he would soon abandon for the guest bedroom once again, I saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the brilliant investment advisor everyone admired, not the charming husband I'd believed in, but a man so threatened by my success that he'd orchestrated an elaborate betrayal rather than simply asking for a divorce. "Good night, darling," he said, kissing my forehead in a gesture that now felt like another performance. "Sleep well," I replied, knowing he wouldn't. Not in our bed, at least. Within an hour, he'd make his excuse and slip away to the guest room, to text Amber without fear of me waking. As I lay in the darkness, listening to him eventually leave, I made a silent promise to myself. When this was over, I would never, again, make myself smaller for anyone. The woman who emerged from this betrayal would stand in her full height, her full power. Nate and Amber thought they were writing the end of my story. They were about to learn it was only the beginning. The next morning, I sat in Greg Thompson's corner office on the 42nd floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise, watching as he and his financial specialist pored over the documents I'd photographed. The city skyline stretched out behind them, ferries crossing Elliott Bay under a rare clear spring sky, a stark contrast to the intimate betrayal we were dissecting. "Look at this pattern," the financial specialist said, pointing to a series of transactions on his tablet screen. "Regular transfers every second Friday starting 11 months ago, always $99,000, just under the reporting threshold." "Classic evasion tactic." Greg nodded, his expression grim. "And all going to an LLC registered in Wyoming with Amber Collins listed as the managing member." I leaned forward, the timeline suddenly crystallizing. 11 months and 2 weeks. Go. That's when he hired her. Right after his longtime assistant, Patricia, retired. Another piece clicked into place. Patricia had tried to warn me, mentioning over lunch that I should keep an eye on the new hire. I'd brushed it off as professional jealousy. How many other warning signs had I ignored? Rachel, who had taken the morning off from her gallery to support me, squeezed my hand under the table. You couldn't have known, Liv. None of us suspected this. But I should have. The signs were there. Patricia's warning, the sudden changes in Nate's behavior, the way Amber seemed to know details about our home she shouldn't have. Like how she'd mentioned our wine cellar organization during a dinner party, though she'd never been invited to our home. There's more, the financial specialist continued, pulling up another document. The Bellevue waterfront property was purchased through a different LLC, but the funding came from an account in the Cayman Islands. An account opened with money transferred from your joint brokerage account. The room seemed to waver slightly. How much? I managed to ask. $3.2 million, he said quietly. Almost exactly half of what was in the account. Greg made a note in his legal pad. He's being careful, taking only half. It suggests he's trying to stay within legal boundaries while hiding the transaction itself. Rachel's expression darkened. What about his firm? Could they be involved? I shook my head. Reed and Mitchell is too respected to risk their reputation. But a thought surfaced. There's a junior partner, Tyler Reed. He and Nate are close. I've seen them having lunch with Amber several times. Tyler Reed, Greg repeated, typing the name into his computer. Interesting. His specialty is offshore trust structures. We should look into connections between him and these LLCs. Bye. Phone buzzed with a message from Nate. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Of course he was. Amber had spin class on Wednesdays, which meant their standard evening rendezvous would follow. Good, Greg said, surprising me. That gives us time. Olivia, I need you to go back to your office and act completely normal. Meanwhile, we're going to request bank records and set up surveillance on both Nate and Amber. I know someone, the financial specialist added. Former FBI, now private investigator. She's discreet and very thorough. Rachel stood, straightening her blazer. I'll drive you to your office, Liv. We can't have your car parked here all day if we're maintaining appearances. As we rode, the elevator down, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. I looked composed, professional in my tailored suit, exactly as I needed to appear. But inside, questions tumbled endlessly. How long had this been planned? How deep did Nate's betrayal go? Who else knew? Stop, Rachel said gently, recognizing my expression. I know that look. You're spiraling into what-ifs. Stay focused on what we can prove, what we can act on. She was right. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I need to call Charlotte, I said, thinking of my sister. And I need to talk to Megan at the office. If Nate has been tampering with company finances, she might have noticed. Back at Mitchell Tech Solutions, I threw myself into work. We had 2 major contracts in development and a potential acquisition to evaluate. My team noticed nothing unusual as I reviewed project plans, met with clients, and handled vendor calls. Only Megan Patel, my CFO and friend of 8 years, sensed something was off. During a quiet moment between meetings, she closed my office door. Is everything okay? She asked directly. You seem different today. I considered her carefully. Megan wasn't just my CFO. She'd been with me since the early days, had helped build this company from a 3-person operation to the 70-employee firm it was now. More importantly, she handled all of our financial integrations with Nate's investment firm. Close. The blinds, I said, making a decision, and pull up all our transaction records with Reed and Mitchell for the past year. Megan's eyes widened slightly, but she complied without question. For the next hour, we combed through every transaction, every investment, every advisory fee. Everything looked normal until... Wait, Megan said, pointing to a series of entries. These advisory fees for the Turner acquisition? Something's not right. I leaned closer to her screen. We regularly paid Reed and Mitchell for financial advisory services on major acquisitions, but these amounts seemed inflated. "Pull up the original contract," I requested. Megan dug through our files, spreading papers across my desk. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the fee structure. "The actual contracted rate is 2%, but these payments are calculated at 3.5%. The difference was almost $600,000. My stomach churned. Nate had access to our payment systems as our financial advisor. He'd been skimming from my own company, probably counting on me trusting him too much to check the details. I photographed everything, sending the images to Greg. Within minutes, he replied, "This is exactly what we needed. Clear evidence of financial misconduct using your company's systems." Megan watched me, concern etched on her face. "What's going on, Olivia?" I met her eyes directly. "I need your absolute discretion on this. Nate has been—" I paused, the words still difficult to say aloud. "He's been using our company to hide money, and he's planning to file for divorce." To her credit, Megan's only reaction was a tightening of her jaw. "What do you need me to do?" "For now, nothing obvious, but flag any unusual transactions, especially anything involving Reed and Mitchell and Megan." I held her gaze. "This stays between us. Not even the leadership team can know yet." She nodded firmly. "Of course. You built this company from scratch, Olivia. I won't let anyone threaten that, not even your husband." By late afternoon, Rachel texted with an update. "PI has first results, sending photos now." The images showed Nate and Amber entering a high-end real estate office in Medina, not his typical territory. Greg's message followed. "The agent specializes in luxury lakefront properties. Same firm that handled the Bellevue condo. They were house hunting, planning their future while dismantling mine." The thought should have devastated me, but instead, it hardened my resolve. I worked late, knowing Nate wouldn't be home anyway. In the quiet of my office, surrounded by the certificates and awards that represented years of hard work, I began my own investigation. Every joint account, every shared investment, every property decision. I documented it all. Around 8, Charlotte arrived with dinner and news. My sister had always been my opposite. Where I was calculated and strategic, she was fiery and direct. Tonight, her usual energy was focused into a laser-sharp intensity. "The PI followed them to Altura," she reported, referring to one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants. "Very intimate, very secluded. She got photos and audio." I forced myself to eat while Charlotte played the recording from her phone. Nate's voice, warm and intimate in a way it hadn't been with me for months, discussing their future plans. Amber's laughter followed by discussion of their timeline. "After the Westridge merger closes," Nate was saying, his voice slightly muffled but unmistakable, "the publicity from that deal will overshadow any gossip about the divorce. Plus, the commission will help with the new place." The Westridge merger, his biggest deal of the year. The irony wasn't lost on me that the company being acquired was one I'd introduced him to through a client connection. "Send everything to Greg," I said, pushing away my barely touched dinner. "And I need you to do something else for me." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Call your friend at the Seattle Business Journal, the one who writes the finance column." A plan was forming, one that would use Nate's own strategy against him. "I think it's time to ensure our divorce gets exactly the right kind of attention." As Charlotte made the call, I stared out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Nate and Amber were planning their happy ending. But they'd forgotten something crucial. Every good story needs a plot twist, and I was about to deliver one they'd never see coming. The Seattle Business Journal columnist Jennifer Chen met me for coffee at an obscure cafe in Fremont, far from Nate's usual haunts. Charlotte's connection had paid off. Jennifer was intrigued by the possibility of an exclusive story about one of Seattle's most prominent financial advisors. So, Jennifer said, stirring her matcha latte, you want me to hold this information until exactly the right moment? Her shrewd eyes studied me over her classic tortoiseshell glasses. Yes, I replied, sliding across a folder of carefully selected documents. These show the timeline of their relationship, the property purchases, the financial transfers. But there's more coming when the Westridge merger concludes next month. That's when you want this to break, Jennifer finished, thumbing through the papers. Right when he's expecting to bask in the publicity of closing his biggest deal ever. She smiled appreciatively. Strategically timed. But why tell me now? Because I need you to start laying the groundwork. Small mentions of Reed and Mitchell's successes, innocent coverage of their public appearances. Make them feel secure, watched, but safe. Jennifer's smile widened. Make them think they're controlling the narrative. Exactly. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from Greg. More photos of Nate and Amber, this time entering a private viewing at an exclusive jewelry store in Madison Park, the same one where he'd bought my engagement ring 15 years ago. Look, at this, I said, showing Jennifer the photos. They're not even trying to hide anymore. Men like Nate always get sloppy, Jennifer replied, her tone knowing. I've covered enough high-profile divorces to recognize the pattern. They think their power makes them invincible. After Jennifer left, I met with Greg, Rachel, and Charlotte at their temporary command center, a private office they'd set up in Rachel's gallery after hours. The walls were covered with timelines, financial charts, and surveillance photos. 2 weeks of investigation had revealed a betrayal far deeper than I'd initially imagined. The jewelry store visit confirms it, Charlotte said, pinning up the latest photos. He's liquidating assets through luxury purchases, harder to trace than direct transfers. Greg nodded, adding another note to his growing file. Classic strategy. The jewelry becomes gifts that can be sold later for cash. But he made a mistake. He held up a document. The store requires insurance registration for major purchases. We can subpoena those records. Rachel burst in from the back room, waving. Her tablet. You need to see this. Amber just updated her private Instagram account. The photo showed a delicate hand, Amber's, resting on a restaurant table, a distinctive diamond tennis bracelet glinting on her wrist. The caption was cryptic. New beginnings sparkle brightest. The location tag showed an upscale restaurant in Bellevue. They're getting sloppy, Greg observed, too confident. This helps us establish a pattern of ongoing relationship. There's more, Rachel continued, scrolling through her tablet. I had my gallery assistant do some digging. Amber is not just Nate's executive assistant. She used to work for Tyler Reed directly. The pieces clicked together. That's how they met, I said, standing to pace the small room. Tyler must have introduced them, knowing Nate was looking for a new assistant when Patricia retired. Charlotte was already typing on her laptop. Let me check something, she muttered, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Got it. Tyler's listed as a member on one of the LLCs that received money from Nate's hidden accounts. They're all in it together, I realized, the scope of the betrayal expanding. Tyler helped set up the offshore accounts, introduced Nate to Amber, probably helped plan the whole thing. Greg was making notes rapidly. This is good. The more people involved, the more likely someone will crack under pressure. We should... He was interrupted by my phone ringing. Nate's face appeared on the screen. I held up a hand for silence and answered, keeping my voice casual. Hi there. Olivia. Nate's voice was warm, practiced. I was thinking about our summer plans. What if we took that trip to France we've been talking about? Just the two of us, 3 weeks in wine country. My heart pounded. Our summer trip was scheduled for 6 weeks after the Westridge merger concluded, when he had been planning to serve the divorce papers. He wanted to take me away to do it privately, minimize the public scandal. That sounds wonderful, I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. Should we stay at that same chateau in Bordeaux? Perfect. I'll have Amber start looking at flights and accommodations. Of course he would. I ended the call and turned to the others, my hands steady despite the anger coursing through me. He's planning to serve the papers during our trip. To France. Charlotte swore under her breath. Greg, however, looked thoughtful. This could work in our favor. If he's focusing on the France trip, he'll be distracted from what we're doing, which is exactly what we need. Which is what? Charlotte demanded. Greg smiled for the first time that day, a predatory expression that reminded me why he was Seattle's most feared divorce attorney. We're going to let him think everything's proceeding according to his plan. Meanwhile, we're filing our own divorce petition, complete with evidence of financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and corporate malfeasance. When? I asked. The day before the Westridge merger closes, when he's most visible, most vulnerable, and most distracted. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. While Nate was focused on closing his biggest deal and planning our trip to France, we would be building an irrefutable case against him. The prenuptial agreement, which he believed had expired after 10 years, contained a crucial clause. In case of infidelity, all protected assets would remain with the wronged party, and the infidelity clause had no expiration date. My father, always cautious, had insisted on that particular wording. Just in case, he'd said at the time. People change over decades. How right he had been. For the next 2 weeks, I played the role of unsuspecting wife perfectly. I attended business functions on Nate's arm, hosted a dinner party for his clients, even helped Amber plan a company event, all while our team gathered evidence, documented the affair, and prepared the legal filings. The private investigator had compiled extensive documentation of Nate and Amber's relationship, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, photographs of them entering and leaving the Bellevue condo. Megan had uncovered more financial irregularities, including several instances where Nate had directed Mitchell Tech Solutions to make investments that directly benefited companies linked to his hidden accounts. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Patricia, Nate's former assistant, contacted me after seeing one of Jennifer's carefully placed articles in the Business Journal, a piece about power couples in Seattle's financial world, with a photo of Nate and me at a charity gala, and a small mention of his dedicated new executive assistant, who had streamlined operations. Patricia invited me to lunch at a small cafe in Ballard, far from anyone who might recognize us. She arrived carrying a leather portfolio, her expression determined. "I've been watching the Business Journal," she said without preamble. Reading. Between the lines, it's time you knew why I really left Reed and Mitchell. For the next hour, Patricia revealed a pattern of behavior that made my blood run cold. Nate and Tyler had been planning this for years. Amber wasn't just a random hire. She'd been carefully selected and groomed for her role. They started positioning her 3 years ago, Patricia explained. Tyler would bring her to firm events, introduce her around. I noticed how she always managed to be wherever Nate was. "Did you confront them?" I asked. Patricia's laugh was bitter. "I tried. That's when the mistakes started happening. Appointments mysteriously canceled, documents misplaced. Then Tyler made it clear. Take early retirement with a generous package or face accusations of incompetence at my age. They forced you out, I realized, to make way for Amber and to protect their scheme." Patricia nodded. "I have copies of everything I managed to document before I left. Dates, transactions, meetings. I've been waiting for the right moment to come forward." As Patricia detailed everything she'd witnessed, I remembered all the times she'd tried to warn me in her subtle way. The concerned looks, the careful comments about keeping my own financial records separate, her insistence that I maintain independent accounts for my business. "There's something else," Patricia said, reaching into her portfolio. "The day before I left, I made copies of Nate's private calendar, including entries about meetings with Amber going back 2 years before I retired. Greg had said we needed to establish a pattern of premeditation. This calendar would do exactly that, showing that Nate and Amber's relationship predated her employment, directly contradicting any claim that the relationship started innocently after she was hired. "Why didn't you show me this before?" I asked softly. Patricia met my eyes directly. "Would you have believed it then? Sometimes we need to discover the truth in our own time, when we're ready to see it." She was right. Even if she'd shown me proof months ago, I probably would have found ways to explain it away, made excuses for the man I thought I knew. I needed to catch them in the act myself to finally accept the truth. The following day, Jennifer Chen published another carefully crafted piece in the Business Journal, this one focusing on the upcoming Westridge merger, with quotes from industry analysts about how the deal would cement Reed & Mitchell's reputation as the premier financial advisory firm in the Pacific Northwest. A small sidebar mentioned Nate's innovative approach to wealth management and included a photo of him leaving a client meeting, with Amber walking 2 steps behind, carrying folders. That evening, I received a text from Greg. "Westridge Board. Votes on merger tomorrow. Our filing is ready. Last chance to reconsider timing." I didn't hesitate in my response. Proceed as planned. When I arrived home, Nate was in an unusually good mood, opening an expensive bottle of wine and suggesting we have dinner on the terrace overlooking the lake. "The Westridge Board is voting tomorrow," he said, pouring me a glass. "By this time, next week, the merger will be complete." "That's wonderful," I replied, clinking my glass against his. "You've worked so hard on this. We should celebrate properly. Maybe a weekend in Vancouver before our France trip? Just the 2 of us?" The way he emphasized "just the 2 of us" made my skin crawl, knowing he'd probably already planned a parallel weekend with Amber. "That sounds perfect," I said, sipping my wine and thinking of the divorce petition that would be filed at 9 a.m. the next morning, precisely when the Westridge board meeting was scheduled to begin. Later, as Nate pretended to work in his office before inevitably sneaking off to the guest room, I stood on our bedroom balcony looking out over Lake Washington. The lights of the east side shimmered on the water's surface, beautiful and deceptive, much like the life I'd thought we built together. Tomorrow, everything would change. The carefully constructed facade would crumble, and Nate would finally understand what he'd overlooked all these years. I wasn't just his wife, decorative and supportive. I wasn't just a successful entrepreneur he could use and discard. I was a woman who had built something from nothing, who had navigated the male-dominated tech world by being smarter, working harder, and seeing 3 steps ahead. And I was about to show him exactly what that meant. Morning light filtered through the bedroom windows as I prepared for the day that would change everything. I selected my outfit carefully, a deep navy power suit that I'd worn to close my company's largest acquisition, pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's, and the watch Nate had given me for our 10th anniversary. A small, symbolic touch that wouldn't be lost on him when he realized what was happening. Nate had left early for the Westridge board meeting, kissing my cheek distractedly before rushing out. "Today's the day," he'd said with that confident smile. "Should be wrapped up by noon." He had no idea how right he was, just not in the way he imagined. Greg had called at 6, confirming everything was in place. "Filing happens at 9 a.m. sharp. Jennifer has agreed to hold the story until 11:30. Right when the Westridge vote should be concluding. Are you ready?" Was I ready to end 15 years of marriage? To publicly expose the man I had once loved as a fraud and a cheat? To walk away from the life we'd built, knowing it had been undermined by betrayal for years? "Absolutely," I had replied, my voice steady. 3 years ago, even 1 year ago, this moment might have destroyed me. But now, I felt oddly calm, like a CEO preparing to execute a difficult but necessary business strategy. At 8:45, I arrived at Mitchell Tech Solutions. My leadership team was gathered for what they believed was a routine strategy session. Only Megan knew the truth. The quarterly projections look strong, my CTO was saying as I glanced discreetly at my watch. 8:58. Before we continue, I interrupted gently, there's something I need to share with all of you. In about 2 minutes, a legal filing will become public record that may affect our company temporarily. Confused glances circulated around the conference table. I've recently discovered that Reed & Mitchell Financial has been using their advisory position with us to facilitate financial fraud. As of today, I am filing for divorce from Nate Mitchell on grounds of infidelity and financial misconduct. The room fell silent. 9 a.m. Somewhere in the King County Courthouse, Greg was submitting our petition, complete with over 200 pages of evidence. I want to assure you that Mitchell Tech Solutions is financially secure. We've already severed all connections with Reed & Mitchell and implemented additional financial safeguards. Megan will brief you on the details. My phone buzzed, a text from Charlotte. It's done. I looked around at the stunned faces of my leadership team, people who had helped me build this company, who had trusted Nate because I had trusted him. I apologize for keeping this from you until now, but it was necessary for legal reasons. I'm telling you first because you deserve to hear it from me, not from news alerts or gossip. There will likely be media coverage. If anyone approaches you for comment, please direct them to our PR team. Questions erupted. Concerned, supportive, practical. For the next hour, I answered everything I could, Megan filling in the financial details. By 10:30, the initial shock had transformed into focused determination. This was what I valued most about my team, their ability to adapt and move forward, even when facing the unexpected. Whatever you need, my CTO assured me as the meeting concluded. The sentiment echoed around the table. At precisely 11:30, as the Westridge board meeting was wrapping up, my phone began buzzing continuously. Jennifer's article had gone live, not just in the Business Journal's online edition, but featured prominently on their homepage. Power couple divided, Seattle Tech CEO files fraud allegations against financial advisor husband. The story was comprehensive, detailing the timeline of Nate's affair with Amber, the financial irregularities, the involvement of Tyler Reed, and the evidence provided by Patricia. Jennifer had framed it as a business story rather than a scandal, focusing on the financial impropriety and breach of professional ethics. Within minutes, other outlets picked it up. My PR director appeared in my doorway, looking both alarmed and impressed. My phone is exploding. How do you want to handle this? I handed her the statement we'd prepared. Route all media inquiries through the approved channels. No comments beyond this statement. And make sure everyone knows that Mitchell Tech Solutions continues to operate as usual. At 11:45, Nate called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again immediately, and again. Then a text. What the hell is going on? Call me now. Instead, I texted back. I suggest you speak with your attorney. 12 calls from Nate. 3 from Tyler Reed. 1 from a number I didn't recognize but assumed was Amber. All ignored. At 12:30, Rachel called with an update. The Westridge board has suspended their vote pending an investigation. Their stock is down 8% already. Reed & Mitchell is in free fall, down 12% and dropping. I felt no satisfaction, only a sense of justice slowly unfolding. This wasn't about revenge, it was about consequences. At 1, Charlotte texted, "You might want to turn on King 5 News." I switched on the television mounted on my office wall to see a reporter standing outside Reed & Mitchell's downtown offices. Financial advisory firm Reed & Mitchell is facing serious allegations of fraud and professional misconduct following a divorce filing by Olivia Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Tech Solutions and wife of founding partner Nathan Mitchell. Sources close to the situation claim the firm used their advisory position to facilitate financial fraud across multiple client accounts. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has reportedly opened an investigation, and the Securities and Exchange Commission has been notified. The reporter continued. The Westridge merger, which was expected to be approved today, has been suspended pending investigation. Reed and Mitchell representatives have declined to comment. We've reached out to Nathan Mitchell, but have received no response. I muted the television as Greg called. It's moving faster than we anticipated, he said without preamble. The SEC has already reached out to my office requesting copies of our evidence. Your friend at Westridge must have pulled some strings. That would be Edward Westridge, the chairman's son and my former college classmate. I'd sent him a courtesy email at 9:05 this morning, giving him a heads up about the filing. What's our next move? I asked. Stay exactly where you are, Greg advised. Don't go home. Don't meet with Nate. Don't engage in any way. Let him dig his own grave with his response. At 3, Jennifer Chen called. You might want to see this, she said, forwarding a link to a hastily assembled press conference outside Reed and Mitchell's offices. Tyler Reed stood at a cluster of microphones, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Reed and Mitchell categorically denies any financial impropriety or professional misconduct, he was saying, his usual confidence notably absent. These allegations are part of a private matrimonial dispute that has unfortunately spilled into the public domain. We are cooperating fully with any inquiries and expect to be completely vindicated. A reporter shouted a question. Is it true that the FBI has seized records from your office today? Tyler's expression flickered. We are cooperating with all relevant authorities. No further questions at this time. Jennifer's voice was amused. Notice who wasn't at that press conference. Your husband is nowhere to be found. Sources tell me he's holed up with his lawyers. By 5, the story had evolved from local news to national. The Wall Street Journal had picked it up, focusing on the potential implications for Reed and Mitchell's clients. Bloomberg was running an analysis of the firm's recent transactions. CNBC had a panel discussing the ethics of financial advisors managing family members' assets. Charlotte arrived at my office with a change of clothes and overnight bag. You're staying with me tonight, she announced, brooking no argument. Greg thinks it's better if you don't go home until things settle. I glanced at my phone. 27. Missed calls from Nate, a dozen voicemails I hadn't listened to, and 40+ increasingly desperate text messages. The most recent simply read, Please, we need to talk. Rachel was waiting at Charlotte's Queen Anne Craftsman when we arrived, along with Greg and Megan. My impromptu crisis team had gathered around Charlotte's dining table, laptops open, phones constantly buzzing. Reed and Mitchell is attempting damage control, Megan reported, looking up from her screen. They've issued a statement placing all blame on Nate, claiming he acted without the firm's knowledge or approval. Throwing him under the bus already, Charlotte commented, setting a glass of wine in front of me. That didn't take long. Greg's phone rang, his assistant, with news that would shift the entire landscape. Amber Collins is requesting a meeting, he announced after ending the call. She claims to have additional evidence and wants to make a deal. The room fell silent as we absorbed this development. Amber, the woman who had helped plan my humiliation, who had worn the jewelry bought with my money, who had expected to step into my life once I was discarded, was now looking to save herself. What kind of deal? I asked finally. Immunity from civil liability primarily, Greg replied. She claims she can provide documentation showing that this scheme goes far beyond what we've uncovered, that it involves multiple clients, not just you and your company. I considered this carefully. My goal had never been personal destruction, only justice and protection of what I'd built. Set up the meeting, I decided. Let's hear what she has to say. The next morning, Amber Collins sat across from us in Greg's conference room, all her usual poise evaporated. Without her designer clothes and perfect makeup, she looked younger, almost vulnerable. Though I reminded myself that appearances had deceived me before. "Before we begin," Greg said formally, "I want to be clear that nothing said in this room constitutes an agreement until documents are signed. Ms. Collins, you requested this meeting. Please explain why." Amber's hands trembled slightly as she opened a folder. "I wasn't the first," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "There were others before me. Women Nate and Tyler used, then discarded. The same pattern, over and over." She passed across a spreadsheet. "These are transfers to 5 different women over the past 8 years. Each relationship followed the same trajectory: hiring, grooming, promises of a future together, then abandonment once they'd served their purpose." I studied the document, recognizing the same patterns we'd uncovered in my own case. Regular transfers just under reporting thresholds, property purchases through shell companies, jewelry and luxury goods used to hide assets. "Why are you showing us this now?" I asked, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. "Because I finally realized I'm just another name on this list," she replied, surprising me with what seemed like genuine emotion. 2 days ago, I found correspondence between Nate and Tyler discussing my replacement, someone younger, with better connections to a specific client they're targeting. She pushed another document across the table. This is their playbook. They documented everything: how to identify vulnerable women, how to manipulate them, how to use them to access client funds, and how to discard them when they're no longer useful. I felt physically ill reading the clinical, calculated approach described in what appeared to be Tyler's meticulous notes. This wasn't just about my marriage. It was about a systematic pattern of predatory behavior that had affected numerous women and potentially defrauded dozens of clients. "I can provide account numbers, transaction records, everything," Amber continued. "In exchange, I want immunity from civil liability and your agreement not to block any cooperation agreement I might reach with prosecutors." Greg and I exchanged glances. The information she offered would strengthen our case exponentially, but more importantly, it would help protect other potential victims. "There's one more thing," Amber said, pulling out her phone and placing it on the table. "You should hear this." She played a recording of Nate and Tyler, dated just 2 days after our anniversary cruise. "Once the Westridge deal closes, we liquidate everything and move it offshore," Nate was saying. "Olivia will be in France when the papers are served. By the time she gets back, there won't be anything left for her to claim." "What about the business?" Tyler asked. "We've been siphoning funds for years," Nate replied with a chilling laugh. "She trusts me completely. With the finances, she'll be lucky if the company survives the quarter once we're done." The recording continued, detailing plans that would have destroyed not just me, but the 70 employees who depended on Mitchell Tech Solutions for their livelihoods. When it ended, the room remained silent for several moments. "Why did you record this?" I finally asked. "Insurance," Amber admitted. "I learned from the woman before me to always protect yourself. I just didn't realize I'd need it this soon." By the end of the day, we had reached an agreement with Amber. In exchange for her complete cooperation and all evidence in her possession, she would be released from any potential civil liability in my case. What happened with law enforcement would be up to her and the prosecutors. The evidence she provided proved devastating. By that evening, the FBI had executed search warrants at Reed and Mitchell's offices and at Tyler's home. The Securities and Exchange Commission had frozen the firm's assets pending investigation. Clients were abandoning the firm in droves. Nate's text messages had stopped entirely after the FBI seized his phone. Through his attorney, he made one attempt at negotiation, offering a generous settlement if I would withdraw the more damaging allegations. Tell Mr. Mitchell that his definition of generous and mine appear to differ significantly. I instructed Greg to respond. All allegations stand. 3 days after the filing, I finally returned to our lakeside home, accompanied by Greg and a security specialist who swept the house for any electronic surveillance. Nate hadn't returned. According to his attorney, he was staying at a downtown hotel while resolving these unfortunate misunderstandings. Standing in the foyer of what had once been our dream home, I felt oddly detached. The soaring ceilings, the carefully selected artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, none of it held the emotional resonance it once had. These were just things, beautiful but meaningless without trust and integrity to animate them. In Nate's office, the abstract painting still concealed the wall safe. The security specialist opened it easily. Nate hadn't bothered to change the high combination. Inside, we found additional documentation that confirmed Amber's testimony and more, including a handwritten ledger of client funds that had been diverted to personal use. "This is enough to put him away for a decade," Greg observed, photographing each page. I nodded, feeling no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for the man Nate had become, or perhaps had always been, beneath the charming exterior I'd fallen in love with. "What happens now?" I asked as we secured the evidence for the FBI. "Now we wait," Greg replied. "The criminal investigation takes precedence. Our divorce proceeding will advance in parallel, but with this evidence and the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause, there's little to dispute." 7 days after the filing, Nate was arrested on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and securities fraud. Tyler Reed was arrested the same day. The photographs of them being led into the federal courthouse in handcuffs appeared on every news outlet in Seattle. I declined all interview requests, issuing only a brief statement through my PR team. "This is a difficult and private matter. My focus remains on my employees and the continued success of Mitchell Tech Solutions." In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Nate and Tyler's scheme unfolded through court filings and SEC reports. They had defrauded clients of more than $30 million over 8 years. 5 former employees came forward with similar stories to Amber's, each one manipulated and discarded according to the same calculated pattern. Patricia, whose evidence had been crucial to the case, stopped by my office one afternoon. "I wanted to thank you," she said, settling into a chair across from my desk. "I tried for years to find someone who would listen, who would look past Nate's charm to see what was really happening." "I should be thanking you," I replied. "Without your documentation, we might never have uncovered the full scope of what they were doing." She smiled sadly. "You know, the worst part wasn't the manipulation or even losing my job. It was doubting myself, wondering if I was just being paranoid or jealous or past my prime. Nate was very good at making women question their own perceptions. I understood perfectly. How many times had I dismissed my own concerns, attributed my unease to imagination or insecurity? How many red flags had I rationalized away because they contradicted the narrative I wanted to believe? "What will you do now?" Patricia asked, as she prepared to leave. It was a question I'd been asking myself repeatedly. The divorce would be finalized soon, with the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause ensuring I retained everything that was rightfully mine. Mitchell Tech Solutions was thriving despite the temporary disruption, our client base actually expanding as former Reed and Mitchell clients sought more ethical advisors. "I'm considering starting a foundation," I said, the idea crystallizing, as I spoke it aloud. "Something to help women recognize and escape financial abuse and manipulation." Patricia nodded approvingly. "Count me in as your first volunteer." 3 months after my world had imploded on that anniversary cruise, I stood in the lobby of Mitchell Tech Solutions, watching as workers installed a new sign, the company's name simplified to Mitchell Technologies. My choice, my name, my legacy, separate from the man who had tried to destroy it. My phone buzzed with a message from Greg. Judge signed off on final decree this morning. Prenup enforced 100%. It's official. 15 years of marriage ended with the stroke of a pen. I felt no elation, no despair, only a quiet certainty that this outcome, while painful, was necessary and just. That evening, I met Rachel, Charlotte, Megan, and Patricia for dinner at a small restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. We had become something of a sisterhood through this ordeal, each bringing different strengths to help navigate the storm. "A toast," Charlotte declared, raising her glass. "To new beginnings." "To justice," added Rachel. "To financial independence," Megan chimed in with a smile. "To trusting our instincts," Patricia contributed. I raised my own glass, considering what mattered most to me now, after everything. "To resilience," I said finally, "and to writing our own stories." 6 months later, I stood at a podium in the Washington State Convention Center, looking out at a sea of attentive faces. Women of all ages gathered for the inaugural conference of the Mitchell Foundation for Financial Empowerment. "Financial manipulation doesn't always look like someone stealing your wallet," I began. "Sometimes it wears a designer suit. Sometimes it has credentials framed on a wall. Sometimes it sleeps beside you for 15 years. The audience was silent, many nodding in recognition. "I'm not here to tell you my story of betrayal," I continued. "I'm here to tell you what comes after, how we rebuild, how we protect ourselves and each other, how we ensure that those who abuse trust and power face consequences." In the front row, my core team sat proudly: Rachel, Charlotte, Megan, Patricia. Behind them, rows of women who had already benefited from the Foundation's programs, many of them former clients of Reed and Mitchell who had discovered their own finances had been manipulated. Nate and Tyler were awaiting trial, having pled not guilty despite the mountain of evidence against them. Amber had reached a cooperation agreement with prosecutors in exchange for testimony. The financial world had moved on to newer scandals, the media to fresher stories. "When someone attempts to take everything from you," I said to the rapt audience, "they reveal something crucial. Exactly what you're capable of withstanding. Exactly how strong you truly are." I thought of that moment on the anniversary cruise, standing frozen in the doorway as my world collapsed. How terrified I had been. How utterly alone I had felt. I wished I could tell that version of myself what I knew now, that she was stronger than she realized, that she would not only survive but thrive, that the very tools Nate had used against her would ultimately be his undoing. "My husband left me for a younger woman," I acknowledged, "but he forgot the prenup he signed protected my fortune. More importantly, he forgot that financial documents aren't the only contracts we sign in life. We make promises to ourselves too. Promises about our worth, our resilience, our right to truth and dignity." Looking out at the women gathered, before me, I saw not victims but survivors, not setbacks but comebacks, not endings but new beginnings. "He thought he was writing the final chapter of my story," I concluded. "He didn't realize he was only the prologue. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out."